airtime tonight as possible. So I'm going to welcome you all and thank you very much for joining us this evening. Before we get started, we're just going to have a very short little moment to settle in and connect to our hearts. And Claire is going to lead that for us. So thank you, Claire.
Hi, everyone. So shall we just start by taking a nice deep breath in? Just take it in through your nose. Hold it a wee moment. And then just let it go. Now do that again a couple of times. And feel the air coursing through our body, pushing out all of the niggles and the worries of the day. And as you do it again, feel the ground under your feet, in the chair, on the sofa, wherever you're sitting. Feel that supporting you. And then with your breath beating nice and rhythmically, take a moment, look inside yourself. Take yourself to your heart. Look at yourself within your heart. And just give yourself a bit of a well done today. And then reach out to all the people who are in the group with us.
There we go.
Breathing in again. And out. And in. And out. And now give your fingers or your toes a little bit of a wiggle. And I'm going to pass back to Liz to introduce our speaker this evening.
Thank you, Claire. It's lovely just to take a couple of moments to do that. It's been a busy day for me, and I'm sure it has for most of you. So to just let the thoughts of the day drift away so we can be really present and together, connected together this evening. Okay, so once again, good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to our second Audience With event. And tonight we're going to be talking about or learning about a really fascinating subject. We're going to be learning about quantum biology with our wonderful speaker, Patricia Worby. Now, just before I introduce Patricia, I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes, especially as I know some of you are new to us, to the Awakening Heart Collective. I just wanted to spend a couple of brief moments talking about who we are and what we're trying to do with the Awakening Heart Collective venture. So we are me, Liz Butler from Heart Source. That's my organization. Louise Livingstone from the Heart Sense Research Institute. And Peter Granger and Claire Berry from Heart Bond. So we have joined together as health professionals with a strong interest in the heart, the physical, energetic, and spiritual heart, and its role in healing, especially needed at this unique time in history. And it's our aim to support awakening of individual hearts and collectively the global heart, thereby encouraging healing on a personal, community, and planetary level. We do live in special times, and it will be obvious to all of you increasingly that our Earth and humanity is in dire need of healing on many levels. For us who've set up this venture, we believe no amount of brain power, no amount of technology is going to solve the world's problems unless the heart is fully engaged. It's the heart in all its infinite wisdom that will allow healing to take place. But this can only happen if we truly understand the heart, its meaning, its role, and how we can access the wisdom and incredible power that lies within it. And so through our events, our videos, articles, our newsletter, we aim to inform and educate on the heart. But also, and most importantly, we want to offer our followers, you, an opportunity to directly connect with, experience, and get to know your individual hearts, so that you may allow your own healing to unfold, because ultimately it's us doing our own healing that's going to lead to global healing. So on to tonight. You may be wondering, after all that I've said, how tonight's topic, quantum biology, serves our mission of heart education. Well, it does, let me tell you. This is fundamental information because we're currently undergoing a revolution in our understanding of the body and how it functions. We're moving ever closer to a point where we will understand the body not just as physical, but also energetic and spiritual. This is happening. This is the new science, and it's so exciting. And once we see the body in that way, then we'll be able to see the heart in that way too. And then we'll come to understand how it is that the heart can communicate with other hearts instantaneously and over vast distances, and how the heart can instruct our DNA to alter according to the body's needs, and many other astonishing things that the heart can do. Let me stop there. I don't want to take any more time away from Patricia. So let me introduce her now. So Patricia Worby has a background in research science, but she made a shift in her career to train as a trauma therapist following struggles with her own health and the deep exploration that came with that. So she's a therapist. She's also an educator. She does lots of talks, and she has her own YouTube channel. We'll put the link for you in the after talk information that I'll send. So there's lots of excellent content there. And she's also an author. She's written several books. The one that's most relevant for this evening is called Life Illuminated. Highly recommend that book. So Patricia,
Hello.
big welcome to you.
Thank you.
And I'll hand over to you now. Do you want to share your screen?
Yes,
I know you've got some slides.
I have. Let's see if you can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can see that. Thank you.
I'm just going to move that out the way and make it full screen. All right.
Perfect.
Happy for me to go ahead?
Yes, take the floor.
Take it away. Take it away. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Today, I'm talking about the power of quantum biology, and in particular, light and life, because I think those two things inform each other. And I want to start really by being a bit controversial. We have been misled. Biochemistry is not the answer to human health. Now, I thought it was, and I went in to study biochemistry. That was my first degree, and really believing that if I understood how the chemicals in the body interacted, we would find the answer to health. But they missed out a whole chunk, and they still are missing a whole chunk. Biophysics, in fact, is faster and more fundamental to cellular communication and function. So it's actually what happens not between the molecules, but in the energetic interactions. And DNA, you know, we've all been taught it's just a code, it's just a blueprint, and it gets sort of printed off, if you like, into proteins. But it's not, in fact, a blind blueprint. It's actually more of a creator with water and a memory store and transmitter. And some people have even described it as an antenna that vibrates. Okay, and so I'm going to be showing you a lot about DNA in a moment. That's just a real-time image of a DNA vibration looking down the molecule through the middle. And you'll see it looks a little bit like cymatics. If you've ever come across cymatics, it's the sort of sound forming waves. So think of it as a vibrating molecule. And in actual fact, electromagnetic fields, sometimes we call that the biofield, is what actually organizes growth as an integral aspect of cellular tissue and whole organism self-regulation. So what makes a living thing living is that it self-organizes. All right, unlike machines or computers, it's able to grow and divide and heal itself. And we think that electromagnetic fields are the major way in which this is done. But of course, because they're invisible, it has been largely unremarked upon and undiscovered until now. But it's interesting to note that the term biofield is actually, it's quite, it's been around a while, since 1994, when the National Institutes of Health, that's an American organization, first used the term. And they described it as electromagnetic biophotonic, in other words, light-based fields that living systems generate and respond to. So it's been known for approximately 30 years. And the final thing, well, almost the final thing I want to say is that the idea that we can use a form of reductionism, which means the whole can be understood by reducing it down to its constituent parts, is a bit of a blind alley in terms of health, because the more we know of detailed biochemical pathways, the less we know about living, it turns out. And a systems or quantum view comes much, much closer to describing a living being and how it organizes itself. And so I would say quantum effects are at the heart of biology, and its fuel is light, which I hope to demonstrate to you in a moment. And here's a quick outline of what we'll be covering, because I thought you might like to know. So the context then is that biomolecular science, or the science that I learned, ignores the biophysics in life completely. And so it's only half the story. I'm going to be covering the main quantum biology concepts, including cellular communication, a quantum understanding of biological water, light, and DNA. We're going to look at mind and body interacting with light, something that's often termed bioluminescence. We're going to consider mitochondrial energy production and light, and then structured water and vascular function. And that's where we start to get more into the heart. And finally, I'll be looking at, in a little more detail, heart rate variability and emotion, and how those two actually inform each other. Now, obviously, there's plenty I've missed out, and maybe another time we can look at chronobiology, the sense of light and time and the rhythms of life, but that's what we're going to be doing today. A lot of this is in my book, but I'm going to make a start really by looking at water, because I do believe water is one of the most important things in the body. So, as I've intimated, biochemical reactions, in other words, things colliding with each other and causing different reactions like membranes and receptors, which we've all been told is simply a matter of certain molecules attaching to the receptor and causing, a pore to open or something like that. They're actually too slow to explain our functioning. And thus, biochemistry has largely failed to prevent disease or promote health, because it's somewhat downstream of what's really going on. And therefore, we're missing something. It turns out that there are these submolecular systems, the subparticles, subatomic particles of electrons, protons, which are little charged hydrogen atoms, and photons, which is the smallest unit of light, that kind of have this quantum electromagnetic flow or exchange within cells. And this is the basis of cellular communication. And what makes it work is that it's almost instantaneous. The communication is so fast that it allows all these things that animals and humans are able to do. And everything in the body, in fact, is surrounded by water, but it's not the kind of water that you're used to that comes, out the tap or you drink. This is a different type of water that's structured in living systems, and we sometimes refer to that as structured biological water. There are many other names for it. You'll hear a few tonight. And in combination with other molecules like proteins and DNA, they kind of align. And so water is what is the medium for the transmission of energy and information. And because the alignment is a liquid crystal, as this diagram shows, it's in layers and it has sort of hydrogen bonds which are shared. It's similar in some ways to a semiconductor or a silicon crystal, but this is a living system. And so it acts in concert. Each layer acts in concert with the other layers to form a sort of coherent whole. And they vibrate, don't forget, everything is vibrating. And because water is 80% of our body by weight, and it is in this structured state, sometimes called the fourth phase of water, it's more like a gel, in fact, than a liquid. And it's this kind of water that's peculiar to living systems, and it acts like a battery. Now, that's been excluded from research largely because most of the studies we did up until very recently were what are called in vitro. And so they were frozen or immobilized parts of the cell in sort of studying them. We kind of stopped them functioning. And so it's taken a while for us to be able to really advance in our technology to be able to study cells as they are in living systems in vivo. And as I've said, it's the water that has this liquid crystalline property, which allows electrons, which are negatively charged subatomic particles, to kind of transfer their charge from one layer to another, and indeed one site to another. And that's sometimes called a redox reaction. It's short for reduction and oxidation, which is the transfer of electrons. That's all you need to know. And it allows it to happen because these molecules of water are not actually connected in the way you probably have heard of water as H2O, but as more like H3O2. So things are shared between different molecules. And so you have this energized state of high reactivity, which is what allows many of the biological reactions in cells to go ahead. And you'll see in this diagram, it sort of forms these hexagonal rings of the molecules of oxygen and hydrogen and the shared bonds between them. It has we call it a vortex. In other words, it's a sort of energy, shared energy field of delocalized electrons. So they don't belong to one particular atom, they're shared between atoms. And protons as well. And that means that reactions can happen really, really fast at about 100% efficiency, which there is no man-made machine on Earth that can replicate 100% efficiency. You always lose energy in most machines, but because of the quantum nature of these shared electrons and protons, it happens really, really fast. And that's another view, I guess, just to isolate the fact that it's in hexagonal layers, hexagonal rings in layers. That's how biological water is arranged, and it's very, very different to the water that you are used to. I've included a little reference there if anybody wants to look it up. You will be getting the PDF of the slides. I should have said that at the beginning. But you will be getting a PDF of the slides, so you can relax. You don't need to take notes. If you're interested in some of this information, you can always revisit it. And so water then has these incredible properties. I haven't got time to go into all of them, but because it induces coherence, this shared vibration and rapid communication, it actually has these astounding properties that are only now beginning to be accepted science. Now, one of the people I first came across, and I was lucky enough to meet him, was a Japanese scientist called Masaru Emoto. And he was doing extraordinary experiments with water subjected to different emotions. And then he was freezing the water and forming these crystals. And he found that water subject to positive emotions like I love you or gratitude or I can do something formed beautiful, well-shaped snowflake type crystals. But ones that were subjected to negative emotions like you make me sick or I'm really angry with you or I can't do this thing, or in this case, certain types of music can also affect the way water crystallizes. And this one is heavy metal music. This is Mozart Symphony number 40, I can't quite read it, 46 or 49. So that was extraordinary. And then other research scientists found that cell water, this structured water, is also very, very different. It's polarized, so it has a negative and a positive end. And another researcher, Mu-Shik John, surmised that aging in humans is what causes this irreplaceable loss of the crystalline water, and that could be one of the factors, or probably the major factor, causing disease, because cells basically lose good communication. And as we know, that is the basis of disease. Vladimir Poponin found that DNA removed from a test tube actually left photons, light particles, in an ordered state. Okay, so you could take the DNA out of the test tube, but the photons within the test tube still had the memory of the DNA that was there. So it's a form of stored memory. So light is allowing a certain kind of memory storage. And a very famous French researcher, Luc Montagny, showed that biological water could receive and transmit DNA codes between two isolated test tubes. Okay, so, and this is two test tubes that have never been in contact. All right, so you could have DNA in one test tube and you could reconstruct that DNA in the second test tube that has no contact with the first one. And we understand that that's because light can somehow transmit information one to the other. And Jean-Paul Benveniste, he proposed the theory of what he called imprinting. So it's like an energy-based resonance in biological water with information from the different biomolecular vibrations in the case of DNA or any molecule, form this kind of water memory. Cleve Baxter found that DNA taken from a donor was affected by the donor's emotions instantaneously, even when in another room or hundreds of miles apart. So they would get somebody to do a donation, say, of saliva, extract the DNA, put it in a test tube, take the test tube hundreds of miles away, and simultaneously do a sort of analysis of the DNA when the donor was asked to think of certain emotions. All right, and the DNA responded instantaneously, even though it's not physically connected. And this is an example of non-local entanglement, which is a quantum property, which is very strange indeed. And the quantum world is very, very strange. It's a sort of a field-based transmission of energy that does not involve chemistry. And could it explain many of the extraordinary results we observe with energy medicine? And I'm thinking there of Reiki and EFT and maybe homeopathy as well. And perhaps even remote healing, because if you can affect the DNA in a test tube, you can surely affect the cells in someone's body. And of course, there are detractors, as ever in science. There's a lot of controversy over some of this, and it has been dubbed pseudoscience by many conventional scientists who just cannot accept that this is possible because it doesn't fit the paradigm that they grew up with. But it has been corroborated by many, including a very famous Nobel Prize-winning scientist, Linus Pauling, and many other researchers who have repeated some of these experiments all over the world. And so I wanted to move from water briefly to looking at the body and how it interacts with light. And understanding that we actually absorb light is a really, well, phenomenal understanding that we didn't have before. And just to consider, first of all, the head and the brain has obviously the left and the right hemispheres, but it also has a groove down the middle. And a lot of these wiggly grooves throughout, just below the cranium, are called sulci. And they act, in fact, as a light guide, like a funnel, if you like. Light hitting the head is actually absorbed through the skin, through into the brain, and actually starts to influence the way the brain functions. So once, in particular, infrared is a very important component of natural daylight, and it travels very well through the body. It goes through skin, through bone, and when it meets what's called the interstitial fluid, which is the tissue fluid that surrounds everything in the body, it kind of gets bounced around because tissue fluid has a very high refractive index. So it gets sort of focused, if you like, until it's able to escape again, because some photons do escape. They go out back through the skin, or it meets an absorber. And we have many absorbers. We have what are called chromophores, which very commonly exist in the blood. Hemoglobin is a chromophore. Excuse me. Chlorophyll. You'll be familiar with chlorophyll in plants, but if we eat plants, we'll have chlorophyll in our systems as well. There's another very famous protein called cytochrome C. We'll come across that in a minute. And things that we ingest, like resveratrol in red wine and grapes. And so any brightly colored molecule tends to be a chromophore, and it tends to absorb light. And once it absorbs the light, it creates an internal high energy quantum state called luminescence. And this is like a stored photon energy, which can be made to do work. That's the important thing, especially in our mitochondria. Now, you may or may not know what mitochondria are, so let me explain. They're the little organelles in pretty much every cell in your body. They're like cellular batteries providing energy for everything that we do. And so anything that can make mitochondria work better is going to improve our health. Here they are. So this is a schematic of a typical cell. You've got the nucleus in the middle, and then these little lozenge-shaped, they look a bit like bacteria. There's a reason, because they were once bacteria, absorbed by an early animal cell. But usually there's hundreds in each cell, so this is not accurate in terms of numbers. But if you see this little lozenge, and inside those are little loops of DNA as well, which is separate to the nuclear DNA, separate to your chromosomes. This is mitochondrial DNA. So having their own DNA, by the way, it's inherited only from the maternal line. So the DNA you have will be what you inherited from your mother, that she inherited from her mother, and so on and so on. It doesn't get mixed like nuclear DNA does. And we're only just beginning to discover how important mitochondrial DNA is, because it helps regulate energy functioning by being read just the same way as regular DNA. It's read in the genes, and then that's expressed as proteins, but it is entirely separate. And it's just a fascinating idea. We're beginning to learn how important it is in certain disease states. So mitochondria, it turns out, aren't just the little blind batteries. They're actually harvesting light through some of the proteins that exist along these inner membranes, these little convoluted membranes. And we call there's a sort of a chain of proteins. We call that the electron transport chain. And that's how bodies produce energy. And so, you know, light is a very important, I would say, nutrient. It's part of the electromagnetic spectrum, which you're probably familiar with. if you understand the visible spectrum, which is a tiny, tiny part of the full electromagnetic spectrum. In fact, this diagram underestimates how tiny, tiny, tiny it is. It's probably the width of a line here rather than the one that's shown. But most of the electromagnetic spectrum around the visible spectrum, shorter and longer wavelengths, is actually invisible to us. And so we can't detect it because we don't have molecules in our eyes, in the retina of our eyes, that vibrate to those frequencies. And so we simply don't see it. But that doesn't mean that we're not impacted by all of the electromagnetic spectrum, which we are, from ultraviolet to infrared. And some would say even beyond that, you know, microwave radiation and gamma rays and so on. Now, this is another really important point, that when you see a diagram like this, you tend to think light is just a wave with a wavelength and, you know, a frequency. But at a quantum level, light is actually also composed of particle-like photons, which is the sort of smallest, unique, identifiable quanta of light. And that's where the term quantum science comes from. It's these tiny, tiny packets of light. So it's impossible to say, is light a wave or a particle? It's both, depending on how you measure it. Another weird quantum effect. And so we now know that the human body absorbs photons from sunlight in the full spectrum of light. And that interacts with water. Funnily enough, water has the lowest absorption precisely at the visible part of the spectrum. For reasons, if anybody's going to ask me, I really don't know, but there must be a significance to that. So the body not only harvests light, but it produces its own light. Biophotons are produced by the body as well, and these are enabling information transfer around the body with, as I've said before, nearly 100% efficiency. So it's a quantum machine. Okay, now there's a little reference here if you want to know more about how the body harvests light, and a wonderful book written by May Wan Ho, sadly no longer with us. She died in 2014, one of the most extraordinary scientists, and she wrote a beautiful book called The Rainbow and the Worm, which really showed the fact that resonance and light were part and parcel of cellular machinery. But sadly, modern life is light deprived. We have limited access to daylight. Most of us work out or inside now, not outside. And we've been given the idea that we should avoid the midday sun and use sunscreen all the time. So we've been given the idea that light is something to be feared. Now, obviously, light does contain UVB, damaging UVB rays, but it's very interesting to note that the midday sun contains roughly 50% red and infrared and less than 10% of UVA light. Okay, that's the stuff that sunscreen is purported to work against, to protect you from. And that less than 10%, 90% is UVA, which doesn't damage us, and only 10% is UVB. So you can see we're screening ourselves from something that actually is going to give us lots of other wavelengths. And this is a major problem. We're shielded by glass and steel most of the time, whether we're driving in our cars or in office buildings. We seldom spend time working outside. And sadly, more and more, we're bombarded by blue light. Now, I'm obviously working in front of a computer, so are you as you're watching this. LED lights that have recently come on as low energy are also, unfortunately, very red deficient. Even the warm white LEDs contain very little infrared, if any at all. Fluorescent lights, which we've had a lot longer, are also deficient, and obviously screens tend to be blue, very, very blue in their spectrum. And so they all impact our health as they contain no red light, and red light is really what we need. So we're very light deprived and depleted, I would say, to the huge detriment of our biology. And just to return a little to why I think it's so key, this is a diagram of the mitochondrial electron transport chain. And this is a sort of slice through one of those inner membranes, these convoluted membranes. And you'll see there are 4 little transmembrane protein complexes. They're helpfully labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's a final one, which is called ATP synthase. That's the one that actually creates the energy currency, the molecule called ATP. Don't worry about this if some of this is not familiar to you. It's the general idea I want here, not the detail. So it's a chain of protein complexes, enzymes, and chromophores. A lot of these contain chromophores, which, as you remember, are the light-absorbing molecules. And there's a sort of electrical gradient going on where protons are being pushed out to create this voltage across the membrane. And that is what we understood was created the energy to do this transfer of electrons from one complex to another. So it would go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and then finally creating ATP at the end. But there's more to this story. In fact, the body, well, it's not the body, it's the body electric, not chemical, okay? And I've called it The Body Electric because that's a fabulous book by Robert O. Becker, very ahead of its time. And so, in fact, although we understand that we've got protons moving across, creating the gradient and creating this electro potential with ATP being produced at the other end. By the way, this little molecule is spinning at about 230 to 650 revs per second. Imagine that. Now, we never knew that because, again, we used to freeze this and see it static and not understand how it worked, but it actually spins massively fast. And so we've often thought that that's it, the ATP at the end, that was the end result, that's what we wanted. And we've completely missed this part, complex 4, that actually produces biological water. All right, and this is the main source of the structured water that I showed you, that liquid crystalline water. And so if our mitochondria are not working very well, not only do we suffer a lack of ATP, which is our energy currency, but we don't get enough structured water either to do the work and to hold the information and keep cellular machinery working. And so it's a real issue. Blockages in this final step, in fact, are what we call the rate limiting step. They're the ones that will likely cause disease if it's not functioning well. And what light does is it allows all of these complexes and all of these reactions to happen very much faster, because it provides another source of energy which kind of helps boost the whole process. And again, there's a little reference there for those of you who are interested. And so, you know, light and mitochondria, or the bioluminescence of mitochondrial cellular communication, is really what it's all about. And, you know, I can't even find on the whole, I've tried, believe me, I cannot find a diagram that includes light photons as part of this process. So I've had to add them in here. They're coming in usually from either the outside, sometimes also internal sources. We have both the exogenous sun and artificial light sources, and we have the endogenous from the body source as well. And it's light that really powers this whole process. Now, obviously, solar photons from the sun have a much higher energy than those produced in the body. So biophotons tend to be produced by metabolism, but they're very weak, okay? But nonetheless, they're very important, and small amounts are emitted all over the body, and especially the fingertips and also the center of your palm. I dare say maybe the heart emits light. I haven't ever measured that, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did. And so, you know, mitochondria are communicating all the time, non-chemically, as well as chemically via these products that they produce. ATP, for instance, is also a molecule that communicates. But biophotons may be another way that the cell harnesses instantaneous kind of communication. So mitochondria have to work in harmony with each other. They're not isolated organelles. They work as a team. And they also need to be able to communicate with mitochondria and other molecules throughout the body. And so it seems that light would be the fastest way to achieve this. And so we can kind of think of photons as acting as enzymes, speeding up the reactions and allowing fine tuning of this electron transport chain to parts of the body that need more energy. So in some parts of the body, for instance, the heart, if you're running, will need more energy at that point. If you're resting, it'll need less energy, and maybe your brain needs more. Whatever it is, it needs to know where the need is greatest. And so it seems that what photons do is they create this high energy, what's called a singlet state oxygen, which is much more reactive, much more electron hungry than the normal ground state of oxygen in the body, which is called a reactive oxygen species. Don't worry about that term. But if you just think of it as really reactive, because light is adding extra energy, this is what gives the phenomenal ability of cells to react really, really quickly. And they also use another quantum phenomenon called electron tunneling. Now, don't expect me to explain electron tunneling because I'm not sure I understand it, but it's something that allows you to bypass an energy barrier and almost instantaneously move from one state to another. And so it seems like the brain and the heart are in particular coordination and communication, and that biophotons are the sort of coordinators of that. And when we're stressed, we tend to release more, interestingly. And so here's another wonderful reference, which you can have a look at. It's Nick Lane, who's one of the people that I follow on YouTube. He's fantastic. And a slightly older name here, Fritz Albert Popp, who again, he won a Nobel Prize for his work. So this stuff is out there. It's just not very well known in the medical establishment and certainly not in conventional circles. And so I would say light is a nutrient, okay? This is a typical spectrum, and you'll see this is blue of a screen, you know. So this is you can see the blue wavelength is really enhanced and you have hardly any red. And so blue light is significantly damaging to humans, especially late in the evening. You'll be hearing a little bit more about that in a moment. LED lights and screens are not great for humans, particularly after dark. What it does is it speeds your heart rate up and it causes your blood pressure to drop, but not in a balanced or good way. It can also disrupt your sleep because it reduces the sleep hormone melatonin. And we're just beginning to discover it drives diabetes because it slows down metabolism by this mitochondrial input. And so sugars are not taken out of the blood. And so it's causing an epidemic of obesity, actually. Red light, on the other hand, that's a longer wavelength. And infrared in particular is very healthful, and especially in the morning. That's when we're biologically wired to absorb red light. And so getting daylight in your eyes, particularly in the morning, is really important. And over winter time, in the past, we would supplement with firelight. We would sit around firelight, which contains a lot of red. We don't do that very much anymore. We tend to be staring at our screens or devices. And so it's really important to understand that we need the full spectrum here. And what we're getting is just a very narrow band of blue. So some ideas here how to improve your light diet would be expose your eyes to morning light without glasses. If you wear eyeglasses, take them off. because it doesn't matter for whatever reason you're wearing glasses, they do filter out light. So just get some daylight. You don't have to stare at the sun, you just have to be in daylight. Buy blue blocking lenses. I've got some here, I'll show you later, for screen work after dark, very, very important. And if you want to know a bit more about this, follow Glenn Jeffrey. He's an amazing UK-based researcher. He's on YouTube, who is really, really up on all of this and will show you the full science behind it. And so, summary of this section then, quantum light and mitochondrial communication seem to be very, very linked. So we need an expanded understanding of how the body works, the bioenergetics of the body, to include this vibrational energy, this resonant energy amplification, which happens when light is included and allows a biological coherence within the body, creating this almost instantaneous communication. Light is information after all. It's not just something that we observe, it's something that does work. And it's stored in cells via mitochondria, via the cytoskeleton as well, parts of our fascia. And, you know, different molecules throughout the body actually help regulate light and energy production. And I haven't got time to go into repair and regeneration, but it's intimately involved in that. And so important in healthy aging, getting enough light. Red and infrared light especially can improve our mitochondrial performance and potentially extend our lifespan. And I think it's fair to say that healthy aging is linked to the health of our mitochondria. And the balance between blue and red light is crucial for human health. It may be linked with brain degeneration, heart disease, and possibly cancer. That's always a controversial subject, but we do know that cancer is intimately linked with mitochondrial DNA mutations. Okay, so it's not just mutations in the nucleus that cause cancer, it's the control. Remember the fine tuning that the mitochondrial DNA does? It's often that which goes awry. It's the cellular communication that goes awry in cancer. And so the gearing is controlled by quantum processes, which make it very fast. And, you know, failures of gearing are made worse when we have too much muscle mass compared to light absorption. So what that does is it steals from the energy hungry organs like the heart and the brain to go to your muscles. And so we have observed that bodybuilders and wrestlers tend to die young. This is very interesting to me. And so getting your body healthful doesn't just mean getting loads of muscle mass and being kind of down the gym all the time. It's actually, in fact, the gym is normally in the dark and under LED lights. So it's probably the worst place to be working out. If you want more information on that, do find Dr. Jack Kruse on YouTube. He's much maligned by conventional science, but he's one of the most intelligent guys. He knows such an awful lot. But yeah, modern traditional science doesn't like him. And please use blue blocking glasses if you're going to work after dark, and get out in daylight to exercise, to tune your mitochondria. My final part is to do with structured water and vascular function. We'll be coming on to the heart in particular. Now, it's very interesting that we get structured water not only in cells, but in the vascular system. This is a slice through perhaps a blood vessel, in this case, a capillary. We get this separation of water around the membranous exterior. And what it does is it helps pull red blood vessels along, easing pressure on the heart. So the heart doesn't have to pump so hard. And as blood vessels move along the capillary, they shed the negative charges to the surrounding tissue. And so the vessel becomes more positive towards the venous end, which creates a voltage gap, just like a battery, to drive the process. Here's a little diagram of a red blood cell moving along from, as it's shedding the negative charges. And so it also explains how blood vessel walls are protected from damage as structured water forms this gel-like layer to protect the vessel walls, and why the loss of structured water might induce, disease of the arteries, atherosclerosis. Now, another reference there, if anyone's interested, Stephanie Seneff came up with this hypothesis in 2015. She was unfortunately another person that's been much vilified because she didn't support what was happening with the COVID vaccine, and so she got derided. But this paper precedes that, and actually I think she does have a very good understanding of what's going on. So we need to resupply structured water. We need to get more structured water in the body by inducing our mitochondria to function better, because they're the main producers. But there's another way we can help supplement through using spring, well, or spiralized water that's been infused with energy by going around a spiral. We can also use filtered water with crystals such as rose or clear quartz, amethyst. We can even add magnets to our water supply. There are many different devices out there which aim to provide a better structure to the water. We should also take care to ground on earth as much as we can with bare feet or hands. I've been gardening today, getting my hands dirty, but I'm also getting lots of positive charges from the earth and helping to kind of absorb the electrons and balance my reactive oxygen species, make myself less inflammatory. And you can also you can take something called methylene blue as well, which is a very interesting product of a chemical dye which has been shown to have remarkable benefits in mitochondrial function. You just add a drop or two to water and you drink it. Now, as ever, things that seem to work get banned. So unfortunately, if you're in the US, you can't buy methylene blue. You can find it online in the UK and in Europe. I don't have it every day. I sometimes take it if I'm feeling a little, low, or I just feel my energy isn't functioning properly. But it really helps maintain mitochondrial function. And so as a quick summary then, water is a quantum informational molecule essential to life, and incorporation into tissues changes its properties to become structured, forming polarized layers which act as a battery. And with infrared energy from internal processes and external, it helps to propel all the kinds of processes, biological processes like blood flow and energy production. And it may even hold memory as a quantum system. Because it's polarized, it's entangled, in other words, interconnected, and it stores information. And this is true also of DNA, of vitamin D, a very important molecule, which isn't a vitamin. In fact, it's a prohormone. And all the chromophores of the body, which share in common incredibly important double bonds, which hold a lot of shared electrons and light harvesting molecules in the body. So we have many molecules in the body which help store light. So living systems have adapted to optimize quantum effects after all. We didn't know this, using light, water, and informing our DNA. And so finally then, the heart is not just a pump, okay? I hope I've shown you that. It has a magnetic field of any organ. In fact, it's 16 times that of the brain. The biofield centered on the heart is torus shaped. It's like this sort of donut. And it's usually between 6 and 9 feet in radius from our heart. We believe now that the heart stores memory of our life and experience and is primary to our biology. I also believe it stores past experience as well, which lives on in our bodies. And that, I feel, is the case with trauma, which I tend to work with. It's essential to our well-being, not just as a pump, but as a frequency generator and harmonizer. It harmonizes with the earth signal, with the brain, with other people's hearts. It's interestingly, the heart is a spiral muscle tissue. If you dissect a heart, there's a great video on YouTube actually of a heart being unwound. It's a beautiful spiral. Who knew? What's important about spirals is they're wonderful vortex generators or antennae. They amplify a signal. The pineal gland in the brain is also a spiral. DNA is a spiral. So do watch that. The heart is not just a pump video, it's extraordinary. So the heart and the brain are entrained, what's called entrained. So one influences the other to become in sync by electromagnetic fields. I think the heart is what entrains the brain. It's that way around. And then the neurochemistry operates after that. So it's electromagnetic fields that first create this harmonic between the heart and the brain. The heart indeed senses things first. We've had many experiments now with the Heart Math Institute in the US showing that you can show people pictures that are far too it's far too fast for the brain to have reacted, but the heart reacts almost instantaneously to whatever the content, the emotional content of the picture. So the heart senses things before the brain and sends a signal to the brain to fire different frequency waves depending on our state, the state of our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, the kind of emotional context we're in. And so the heart is really the generator of emotion. And I know you've done a little bit on heart rate variability last time, but just to remind those of you what it means and why it's important. So the heart and the brain are connected not just electromagnetically, but also by various nerves, in particular the sympathetic system, the cardiac nerves, and the vagus nerve, which is the parasympathetic, and they have opposite functions. One slows the heart, one speeds it up. So the heart is modulated by this nerve connection, but it also has its own nerve center, the intrinsic cardiac nerve system. So there are nerves all around the heart as well. And heart rate variability is really about the interbeat variation. So if you look at a typical heartbeat here, and this is a pretty good diagram because it's showing that it's not the same, it's not identical. Each heartbeat is not identical. It might slow down at some point when you breathe out, and it speeds up when you breathe in, and it should be variable. That's the whole point of the variability here, the interbeat variation. Now, if you plot that alongside time, you actually get a very interesting plot, and it's actually a measure of the autonomic nervous system health. Variability is a sign of health. Okay, a steady heartbeat is actually what precedes death, and it's a definite sign in pediatrics if a baby is born with a very, very steady heartbeat that they're not healthy. But interestingly, when we're out of synchrony with our lives, when we're chronically stressed and our harmony is destroyed, also so is our heart rate variability. And so learning to harness your heart rate variability and actually enhance it in ways actually helps your biology to harmonize. Here's a plot with feeling positive emotion. So if I plot the interbeat variation, so if I breathe in and it increases and I breathe out and it decreases and in and out, this is a healthy heart rate variability. However, the bottom plot is more typical, I would say, of most people. And certainly when I measured my HRV, when I used to do a sort of more regular job where I was in a sort of university and doing kind of research function, I would often come home and think, oh, that was an easy day. And I would measure my HRV expecting a nice plot, and seeing it like this is really dysregulated because I'm doing stuff that I don't feel in harmony with. I'm being forced to do things in a way that wouldn't be natural to me. And something is telling me, my biology is telling me I'm out of synchrony. And so when your heart and brain are in coherence, you have a sine wave. this lovely sine wave here that's in flow, you feel good. And when you're chronically stressed, this is destroyed. And so this has biological consequences. How we can overwrite that? Well, obviously, all the practical things that I've showed you before, but also getting your emotions in check, finding ways to feel gratitude, compassion, and love, because these are vibratory signals that resonate within the vortex chambers of the heart. They help to synchronize your brain waves and get you into more healing states of alpha and theta brain waves and restore your cellular function. And so doing heart meditations and HRV training are brilliant ways of restoring function to the body as they harmonize both the brain and body. So don't forget, heart state entrains brain state, not only to make us feel good, but to change our DNA expression, because DNA is an antenna. And since DNA codes for proteins of life, our experience of life changes when we harmonize. How can we do that? Well, there are very many ways now, and I'm only going to touch on some of these. HRV or heart breath training is one of the simplest ways. There's the Oura ring here. There are various apps that will measure it for you. They help you change and kind of gain control over your heart expression. So it changes your inner state to one of harmony and coherence. And as I say, many different devices now. I can't even begin to tell you how many there are now. But just doing a simple heart breath meditation, just like the one we began with actually today. But here's a few that I know of. Oura Ring Breath Mix Inner Balance, which is the Heart Math Institute version. And there's various vagal toning apps and devices now as well. But remember, the vagus is a very important influence on the heart. And some deliberate evocation of different emotional states. So, finding ways to feel gratitude, finding ways to feel joy will at a stroke change your expression of life. It changes your cellular machinery and changes your health. And there's a brilliant book about that called The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. Now, I had to cover this because this is my field, but most childhoods contain unresolved emotional attachments, okay? Attachment wounds are wounds with your caregiver, usually parents, that need to be somatically processed. In other words, it felt in the body as over. And that's a definition that I use for trauma, complex trauma. And so not only do we need to evoke good feelings now, we also need to resolve past experience to take it out of your energy field so that your body can restore balance. And this is really, really key. And so doing things usually that might involve a practitioner, usually they do. EMDR is a wonderful tool using eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing. That's what EMDR stands for. Just basically means moving the eyes across a field of vision with a practitioner who kind of helps you to process stuff. Breath work, psychedelic therapy, craniosacral therapy, lots of bodywork therapies will do that for you. And so I'm drawing to a close now. Starvation of infrared light is endemic due to indoor lighting and the kinds of lifestyles we're leading. Most fluorescent and LED bulbs, unlike the old-fashioned incandescent, by the way, which was designed to mimic sunlight, okay, and then we got rid of them all, contain little infrared in their spectrum, okay, so, and the near infrared, which we particularly need. And the effects may take months and years to develop, so we don't often spot it or we don't make the association. But we really need to understand this, and schools and offices and hospitals in particular need to become aware and maybe replace the LED lights. It isn't going to be a popular move, or we need to rework LEDs so that they have better red light spectra, and that's actually something that is being worked on at the moment. Because after all, our mitochondrial energy dynamics is everything in terms of our health. And the inflammation, as you know, is the basis of all disease. And so making sure our mitochondria work well and we get a good oxygen balance, this reactive oxygen species output, is really key. The heart is more than a pump. It's an antenna and a vortex generator, which entrains the brain and thereby the rest of the body via autonomic and vagal regulation. And HRV is a direct measure of its health and can be trained. That's so important to know. You don't have to accept where you are. You can actually move beyond it. The body is a quantum biological system composed of light, energy, and information. And a quantum view of the body views disease as a failure of coherence, not a random event. Not a random event. Your biology is not your destiny. You can change it. And that is something that goes against everything that is taught currently. Water is the means, the medium, and the message. That's actually a direct quote from Mei Wan Ho, and I just love it. It interacts with what we call the holo field, which is the field around us that we live within, the all that is, if you like. And emotions are so key to our health because they're our internal readout of an internal state. They're far more than feelings, all right? They actually resonate throughout the body. And so thank you for your attention. More information is in my book. It's much more detailed, obviously, than I've covered here. You may also be interested to look at the Quantum Biology podcast and Doctors Alexis Cowan and Jack Cruz on YouTube, both of whom are very much more detailed and possibly knowledgeable than me. But I was trying to give you an overview today. So you can find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk. I've got various books. I do one-to-one sessions with people and my community group session monthly as well. And I'm going to leave it there and stop my share and ask if anybody's got any questions. In the dark.
Oh, Patricia, I knew it was going to be wonderful. I think everyone would agree that that was absolutely brilliant. So much covered in that hour, just over an hour. And I mean, for me, as I'm listening, there was so much information there, but really, it's so simple, isn't it? It comes down to light, water, and living in harmony and getting in sync and emotional well-being. And I was also thinking about my animals as I was listening to you, because if we just watch animals and how they behave, then all of those things that you've covered. So I'm thinking of my cats, for example, they will, and my dog will find the sunlight spots in the house whenever they can, and they will move away from tap water.
They won't drink
they'll
it.
go and find the natural water as much as possible.
Mm.
And they spend the majority of their life relaxing and resting. So, those three things that you've covered, we only have to look at nature and we see that really brought home to us. Thank you so much. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people that want to ask questions. We've already had some come into the chat box.
Okay.
So maybe we'll start there, and then we can also, people can also come off mute and ask questions as well.
Okay.
So it's great. You've given us some practical information on what we can do. And so you talked about the methylene blue, and Carolyn was particularly interested in that, and she's asked whether it helps with energy production in people that have got things like chronic fatigue. Now, you had something like that yourself, didn't you, Patricia? So what are your thoughts on the methylene blue for that condition?
I think it could be helpful. Like many things, I think you have to start really, really very low. Some online commentators will say 15 drops a day. That's far too high for people who have CFSME. You have to start with 1 and build up very slowly, because you remember the gearing in mitochondria. You can't just shove it into 4th gear, okay? Because it simply won't work because you haven't got the fuel. But adding a little each, say, having a week of 1 drop a day, and then I'm going to have to do the same in a minute. Then increasing it gently, I think is really key here. Now, I don't have CFS anymore, but I did have it. It wasn't available when I was going through my journey. If I'd known half of what I know now, I would have had a lot easier time. But you do have to be careful with these things. And actually, I'm looking at the next question, which similarly says, I've just been told that red light therapy, da 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 da. Yes, exactly. You have to be really careful. Red light therapy, if you have a malignant tumor, is going to encourage growth. Methylene blue, on the other hand, what that's going to do is help maintain the communication, because it's going to allow the mitochondrial function to work better. So I have to be really careful with cancer because it's such an emotive subject. You would have to be working with a practitioner who specializes in this. I would not do this yourself. I do know that red light therapy is a really bad idea on its own, and it might be that methylene blue helps to gear up properly and take away the disharmony that's basically going on and the loss of communication that is, cancer. So
because
yeah,
a lot of people with cancer are using infrared saunas or lights, and
I'd be very wary without an intimate knowledge of what's going on at a quantum level, because you could be just boosting the wrong kind of growth. I think we just have to be working with a protocol that you are working with someone that understands this and can monitor what's going on at a cellular level. Just shoving infrared at something when you don't understand what's happening is not a great idea. And that, I mean, okay, for cancer patients, it's fine for most other people. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you for that. So we've got lots of information there from Jeremy. Jeremy, I'm going to introduce you a bit later, because Jeremy is doing our next talk next month.
Fabulous. Yeah, Gerald Pollack.
I'll come back to some of his comments. Then Carolyn has another question about being in the sun. I mean, yeah, we've been given a lot of information about, using sunscreens and not going out in midday sunshine, as you said, Patricia. Yeah. Do you think we should ignore that advice now?
Well, my feeling is it depends where you're living, obviously, because obviously the latitude makes a big difference. But getting more sunlight, I think, is essential. And slapping sunscreen on, I would avoid that unless you are. Well, I'm very fair-skinned. If I was going into really high sort of sunlight, not in the UK, I might put on a natural sunscreen during the heat of the day, but most of the time I don't. I think getting sunlight on your skin is so important, and I will use a natural sunscreen if I need to, something like a sesame seed oil rather than anything chemical, because I don't think the products in there are beneficial to health. So
well, that's the other issue, isn't it? It's not just about blocking the sun, but it's about all the chemicals that you're putting into your skin, and we know the skin absorbs a lot. I mean, what I tend to do is if I feel that I'm getting too much sun, I'll actually put some clothes on, a t-shirt or something to help protect, or go in the shade, rather than using a load of cream. So all the more natural ones, like you're saying.
Talking of which, I've got my blue glasses here.
Yes. So which blue glasses are you
well, they're
using?
not. Then no, the branding is immaterial. These are blue blocking glasses, so they're not the orange or yellow
the
ones.
amber.
The amber ones you're supposed to use after dark. These, because we're in sort of twilight, I've just got my regular ones, but they're not particularly attractive. They look like science glasses, actually, to me, the ones we used to wear in the lab. But they do make a difference, actually. So just investing in a pair of those is a good idea.
And they're
not wearing
pretty They're pretty
Yeah.
reasonable, aren't they? You don't have to spend a lot. I've
Oh
got
gosh,
some,
I think these were 20 quid, honestly.
yeah,
Not a
yeah.
lot at
I've
all.
got some that have
Yeah.
a prescription as well,
Yes,
so
you can get
you
them.
can get those easily. The other thing you can get is apps to put on your phone or your laptop, which will change the screen light as you move through the
That's right.
day.
Yes.
So it will coordinate with the sun, and it will be quite amber coloured in the morning. It will go towards the middle of the day. It will go brighter with a bit more blue light, and then it will fade down again into the amber in the evening.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So those are good. And again, you can get them,
Yeah.
but almost no cost or completely free.
No, that's right.
Okay. What else then? Would anyone like to come off mute and ask Patricia a question? Is there anyone that wants to speak? Or a comment? We've got some very knowledgeable people with us, I know.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Jeremy's comment there. Yeah. Electronegativity and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Jeremy, is there anything you wanted to say? Where are you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. That was really, really interesting. You've you've done me a lot of favors because you created a massive segue for me talking about water coherence and
brilliant.
kind of lopped off a third of my presentation.
Oh, sorry about that. Or good thing. I'm not sure.
Repetition's always good.
It's fantastic, and of course you've got into a really deep forensic analysis of what's going on at the cellular level. I was just curious because my wife's she's a cranial sacral trauma trained osteopath.
Brilliant.
So she works with cranial sacral and trauma, and I was just curious to hear a bit more about this idea that cellular trauma exists in liquid.
Yes.
And it's stored. And I'm just wondering how much you have sort of dived into that and can tease a bit more out about that, given that you are somatically trained and whether
Well,
I know it's a whole rabbit hole, do you know what I mean? But
no, it is. So
I just need to sort of pick your brains about that, because that for me was like the frontier of all your wisdom with your empirical experience. And I think that's fascinating area,
Well, it's probably worth mentioning very quickly. My initiation into this whole field was where I inadvertently triggered a somatic memory in a client just by touching the back of her neck, and had no idea, because we'd never been trained in any of this. I just had an instinct that what was coming up was something from the past and wasn't current. So I think possibly you've mentioned in your comment the piezoelectric effect. So I think touch is just really key. Remember, biophotons are coming through your fingertips anyway. I think there's some cellular communication happening between the therapist and the person being treated. In my case, a very light touch. It wasn't anything. It was really just a connection. And this lady just had a massive reaction and shot off the bed and started choking in front of me. A childhood memory that she'd long repressed, had not been recalled at all, suddenly came into awareness. And that can only happen instantaneously because you're using these quantum effects, I think, through biophotons perhaps, and also there's the electromagnetic connection as well from touching the fascia.
And the speed of fascial communication as well.
Fascial communication, which is another liquid crystal matrix, of course.
Yeah.
It's similar to structured water, and it contains structured water. So it's just it intersperses throughout the whole body, and yes, it's almost instantaneous. And to witness that, and also the reverse, which is the healing frequency of holding someone, which is what craniosacral does. I mean, it's a supremely healing art to be held and to know that you are safe in the hands of someone who gets you. And that's usually how I work. I don't do it somatically anymore. I do it via eye movement. But to be able to heart connect with someone and know that you're there for them, and they can therefore release what's been unprocessed and unheard, usually for decades of work. So it's a profound thing, this trauma release through
No, well, I hear about it from my wife every day because she's working on the front line, and
Yeah.
what I suppose I kind of am in receipt of in your talk and with all the other wisdoms I've come across is this notion that the body is this holographic tape recorder,
Yeah.
and the cells remember absolutely everything.
Yeah, it's a holographic principle that it runs on,
And the
so
fact that it's happening at the cellular informational level of water holding that memory
yes.
is just a fascinating. I mean, it's such a huge subject. It's just incredible.
So the part contains all of the whole, and that's, there's no machine that we've ever made, even a quantum computer cannot do that.
And that,
The whole is in every part.
yeah.
And so everything is connected from our first breath to our last. And all the events of our lives are memorized at a cellular level too, which is extraordinary.
And so have the transgenerational, non-physical.
Now that's a really good point. So I didn't even touch upon that, but yes, transgenerational trauma is a real thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think I'm going through something of that myself. I've just hit the age at which my father died, and there's something going on in my system as I am processing the fact that I have outlived him. And it's a remarkable thing that I can't even begin to explain, but I just know something is going on that is happening in me that I am not in control of, but it's unfolding.
Wow, amazing.
So yeah, I think understanding that we're holographic, we're fractal. There's so much to understand about the human body that's completely missed from a conventional training, medical training. I went through 3 years of a medical training, and then I diversified, but it's completely absent. We were just a load of colliding molecules that happen to go wrong occasionally. And I would ask the question, why do people get cancer? Oh, it's just a random event. No, it's not a random event. It's not. It has a function of everything that's happened to you before that moment. And because the cells are storing not just your experiences, but those of your predecessors, that's another reason I think people say, well, in that case, why do children get cancer? Well, yes, because there's stored memory. And that's not to point the finger at anybody and say, it's the parents' fault or whatever.
That's when you get in the realm of karma,
It is, yeah. It's sort of coming into another way of looking at.
Yeah. There was a comment I made because you touched on something very important to do with the light spectra, the visible light spectra, and how that we're surrounded by many other frequencies that we can't see.
We don't perceive.
And of course, in the comment, one of the things I said was that we can have a higher degree of autonomy over things which have now become normalized, like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and also turning off the electrical grid where we sleep, because these things, the AC fields are so powerful, they affect our direct current fields and our mitochondrial function when we go into rest rejuvenation when we're sleeping.
Very important, actually. Very well mentioned. That's one of the things I should have put on a slide and forgot. But
there's so many things, you know what I mean?
Keep electromagnetic fields out of your bedroom. Shield your Wi-Fi at night. You can get a Faraday cage that fits over your router. Switch off everything. Don't have your electrics still on standby. Don't have televisions in your bedroom. These things, they're invisible, but they have an effect, and over time they're building and building because we're subject to, you look on your phone now and you go into your network, you can see your neighbors and and the people across the street.
Yeah.
And you're being bathed in high frequency electromagnetic radiation, particularly with 5G. So I just think anything we don't understand, we have to be very wary of. And just do what we can. You don't want to live in fear, but you want to understand what can be done to kind of shield yourself and live in harmony as much as possible.
But I mean, on the back of that, we were birthed and evolved on a cascade of natural Schumann resonance and natural environmental resonance that brought our biology into existence. And it's only in the last 100 years, or if that we're suddenly now being bathed in these not native to our, as you say, they're not endogenous, they're not a part of our evolutionary story.
No, they're not.
And it's just, I just can't. I mean, we turn off the electricity in our house. We have our fridge, even we turn the fridge off because the fridge can last for 12 hours without.
Oh, right. Well done.
It makes such a difference. I want to try it, just turn everything off. It's like camping in your own house.
Absolutely. Yeah. You sleep better, don't you? And, one of the best things I did was get get my meter box, you know, with all my electrics sorted out, because I bought quite an old house and it was all, you know, really dodgy electrics here. And I really noticed the first night after I'd done that I slept better and I just didn't feel that disharmony.
Yeah.
So I think we have to accept that just because something's invisible doesn't mean it doesn't affect us.
Exactly.
And anything that you're told is safe, be skeptical.
Well, as you say, there are many invested interests in us going to sleep at the wheel and not paying attention to all these things that are contraindicated in terms of.
I'd just like to say, you know, all the blue light, all the obesity drugs, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Now we have injections. Sorry, yes.
No, don't worry, Patricia. We've just got another couple of questions.
Yeah.
So Rosie is working in a very open-minded school at the moment, and you mentioned thinking about this in schools. I think you were talking about the lighting in schools.
Lighting, yeah.
She
LEDs.
says, do you mean literally changing the lighting in the schools, or perhaps adding a supplementary lighting area? Did you have any specific thoughts on
changing the lighting completely would be probably very difficult to do. But having a supplementary area, I do know there's a lab in London where they do all these experiments. I think it might be linked with the one I covered, Glenn Jeffrey, but they have got LED lighting throughout the building, except for his office, where he's managed to get some old incandescent bulbs, and people gather there for lunch. You know, there are ways of supplementing more natural lighting, or if you can get outside, obviously, but if you can't, you know, having supplementary red light for, you know, a period during the day, if you can. But I think we need a more policy-based approach here. We certainly need to understand this and not put them in hospitals and prisons and schools as just the only alternative, because it's more energy efficient. But the biological implications have not even been worked out. So
I know we really are at the beginnings of this new understanding. As a nutritional therapist, you know, it's not just mainstream medicine that's not touching on this. As a nutritional therapist, I was never taught that light is a nutrient. You know,
no,
this is only really coming into our awareness now, and the implications of how far we've moved away from natural light and natural water is really, we're just at the very beginnings of it. But hopefully, as we start to understand, we can change our environments. Claire and Peter, you have a question. I think you have your hand up. You're on mute, Peter.
Keeps going. Yeah, I mean, if you want to leave it now, I know we're coming up to the end. Is that?
No.
Okay.
I'm sure I can squeeze
I'll
you.
make it quick then. So I was interested. Thank you, Patricia, for a very interesting talk. Very interested in the non-local entanglement ideas you came with. So in our own studies, we found non-local synchronization through high rate variability. Some very strong evidence for it. So I'm sort of intrigued by the idea of a quantum consciousness. There's actually, and there are models now for that with microtubules in the brain. Proteins.
Hameroff, Stuart
Hameroff and Penrose, you know, one of the greatest mathematicians on the planet. Any ideas on that? Any thoughts?
I would say it's undoubtedly possible to have non-local entanglement across the, you know, vast distances. So certainly working like you do in auditoria and seeing people's hearts changing along with the people that are performing, I'm sure is entirely possible. How it operates, I would say, it's a field. It resonates, and we are part of that field. And not only are we in it, but we are informing it. I see us, interestingly, when you look at the scale of the universe, from the very smallest quanta to the very largest cosmological features, human beings are right in the middle. And so, although I don't know how it's done, I know that somehow our brains are arranged to decode the field to provide us with some semblance of reality, which of course isn't real. It's a simulation of quantum reality. But we are also informing that field as we are making decisions and feeling emotions and inventing things, because we're in communication with the field. We are the field. Consciousness is us. So quantum consciousness is the fundamental reality. What we see and touch is just an agglomeration in space-time.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we're seeing it as well. So that's good to see that other people can say.
So consciousness is primary. Matter is secondary.
Yeah, brilliant.
So that's, if that answers your question, as far as I'm concerned.
No, it's nice to hear someone else saying what we're thinking as well. Yeah, thank you.
Well, we're going deep into the quantum now, Patricia, and we could probably ask you questions all night. It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you again for a wonderful talk. And lots of people are saying lovely things. Sarah, who is working in cardiac research, says this has really blown her mind.
Great.
And I'm sure many people are feeling the same. So lots of gratitude and lovely thoughts and feedback from people. I just want to say, Patricia, your book, you've mentioned it. I'm just going to show it again. If anyone wants to find out more about all that you've talked about tonight, this is the one to go for. And thank you again for offering to send your slides to people. So we've done a recording of tonight's event. You may well want to listen back because there was so much brilliant information. So I'm going to send you the link for the recording tomorrow, and I will also send you the slides in a PDF format, so you can have a look through those as well. Now, Patricia has very generously given her time free of charge this evening, and so if you do feel that you would like to show some gratitude to her for that, we have a donation link on our webpage. I'll send you details of that tomorrow, and all donations will be going to Patricia for the next month to say thank you very much for her very generous presentation tonight. So thank you, Patricia, again. Thank you all for coming along and spending an hour and a half of your evening with us. Is there anything you want to say finally, Patricia?
Well, I'm sitting with my full spectrum lamp on, by the way, just to say, I just find the human experience is so fascinating. I think we owe it to ourselves to learn more about how we truly operate and to eschew the conventional view, because the conventional view has taken us down a very strange road and none of us are healthier as a result. I would love to see some of this information taught in schools, and just generally, that's really why I'm here, is to help promote this understanding and give hope to people that you don't have to accept what you're told or just suffer random chronic disease without thinking there's nothing you can do, because there's always something you can do.
Wonderful, totally agree, and you're a living example of that as well. So thank you again, and thank you all for watching. And as I said, sorry, I've got a dog pawing at me, wants to go out to the loo.
Okay.
Thank you again for your time this evening, for joining us. Jeremy will be with us, who we've heard from this evening, talking about water in even more depth on the 22nd of May. So you might like to look out for that. I'll be sending all the details in our newsletter. And once again, Patricia, thank you. And we will connect again very soon. Thank you all for joining. Take care.
Thanks very much, Liz.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Patricia.